There's a question of construction to Mike and Martin. I'm Hamish Wilson from Minus 7. I know we've been trying to sell into the residential construction business to house builders who don't seem to be interested in putting any extra costs on their building. Even though if you want to put technology onto your building, that will increase, if you like, or reduce the running costs of the housing. It seems like housing construction companies are wanting to keep the initial construction costs low. And until we can break that, it's very difficult for construction companies to take an interest in the through-life cost of a building.
Yeah, I think a couple of people touched on the capex OPEX dilemma that remains as perennial as it always has done. If that's not a tautology, which it is. If anyone, how do we unlock that challenge and get companies to want to invest a little bit more up front?
Well, if I go first, I mean, I definitely recognise that this is a challenge. My own company, Skanska, we build something like 4,500 units. I would say globally, it's more internationally, actually. And we do push the green agenda, and we do put renewable technology into our products. And actually, we use it as a selling point, too. And, you know, we had one little foray recently here up in Cambridge, and we put the same thinking into those units. We didn't continue with it for different reasons, but we found that very quickly some of our competitors around us also followed suit.
We as a business, we're a supplier into that sector, but we work very hard at understanding where that sector's going to go and what solutions are appropriate. We're doing a lot of research on things like thermal mass benefits, so using the fabric of the building to kind of deliver benefits to the end user. What we find, though, is those types of systems are more likely adopted when somebody has a long-term interest in the property. So, you know, it might be social housing or rentable housing or a private person building it for themselves. But some of the technologies are really quite exciting, and as they're used and adopted more widely, the cost of those comes down. So, you know, we were challenged originally with the old code it's still in existence, but the Code for Sustainable Homes. And the challenge was, how did you get to level 4? And everyone was really terrified of that adding huge costs. Now, I think it's generally accepted that you can get to Code 4 without really adding much cost. And it's all about doing the research and the development and getting people comfortable and developing the ideas and technologies that take the cost out.
Another OPEX CAPEX question, if you like, to do with flood defence. Obviously, quite a commitment going forward there to works on flood defence. How much is actually committed to maintaining waterways and ports and such like going forward?
You need to have clearly that combination of upfront capital costs as well as ongoing maintenance, as well as other factors that I touched on around drainage and house level, sort of home level defences. What the precise numbers are, I don't know, but there's clearly a need in developing the types of frameworks that we were talking about, the types of how do you do the cost-benefit analysis on a flood defence network to build in the need for maintenance and to make sure that where we're building flood defences, that the budgets are there also to maintain them adequately, because otherwise you've lost all that initial advantage.
How concerned are you about the current flood spending outlook? Because your graph there looked slightly worrying, that it was well below sort of levels of projects that would make sense, and it also seemed to be falling again, even though the government had this pressure applied to it by the weather gods a couple of years ago. But it looks as my take on it was it seemed to be overall spending falling again.
So the government's committed quite a lot of money out to that early 2020, several £billion, and that reduces flood risk for a large number of houses. What happens is that we're continuing to build houses, and in some cases houses and other buildings continuing to be built in floodplains. And so what you see there is the fact that, you know, for the existing sets of buildings, levels of funding are quite good, and we need to make sure that as new buildings go in, that either they're not going in floodplains, and that's up to local authorities and local planning decisions to take into account the risks of flooding, or where they are going in, that suitable defences are going to be in place.
One of our presentations had a list of 10 exciting looking green infrastructure, low carbon infrastructure projects. Everyone on the panel, which element of green infrastructure, which new green infrastructure project do you find the most exciting, the one that could really engage the public, bring big carbon savings? You're not allowed to pick your own, by the way. Electric vehicles, actually, because I think we're at the beginning of a real wave of uptake of new vehicle technologies, electric, then hydrogen, and I think people are interested in cars, in how they get around, and I think exciting the public around that, from an airport perspective, how do people get to and from the airport, get around the airport, is my number one.
I'm really attracted by the ideas of some of the pilots. I think there's pilots going on in Milton Keynes and Coventry on driverless vehicles, and I think that has huge potential. I can't remember whether it's San Francisco or not, where they've used devices in car parks to identify, linked to an app, so that they worked out that about 30% of the emissions was coming from traffic, from people looking for parking spaces. So through that app, it can direct them exactly to a car parking space. And I think some of those have huge potential benefit.
Yeah.
Well, I would go for the district heating and the geothermal projects. I know that's two, but they're very much linked, because it creates construction jobs, it tackles social inequalities, and it decarbonises our heat.
Yeah, and an area that's much neglected at the moment. I think that, as the government made clear recently, renewable heat, we are struggling. Next up.
I think it's about housing. The old housing stock is still churning out a lot of the carbon emissions, and it's possibly a solution there with district heat. But we need to do something to deal with that, I think, cleverly and sustainably.
It's going to get really tough for you, Matthew. One
You're
of
allowed
mine's
to double
already
up.
been taken. No, I agree with all of those so far. They're very good ones. I would add sustainable cities, because the population is growing. People want to live in cities, so therefore we need an integrated approach to how we deliver sustainable cities. So that's not perhaps one project; it's one focus area for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not even going to try to compete with coming up with a new idea, but I think what is interesting about all the ideas we've heard is they've pretty much picked out the two biggest sources that we're worried about now. So transport on the one hand and heat on the other. There's obviously a lot that has to be done on the power sector in a range of other areas, but we sort of know what the solutions are, and it's a question of doing them. But we certainly need to come forward with more innovative, more acceptable, and more lower cost solutions on low carbon heat that will deliver the types of levels of emissions reductions that are going to be consistent with the carbon budgets and meeting the 2050 target.
So there we go. Electric vehicles, automated vehicles, renewable and district heat, much greener housing, smarter and more sustainable cities. And if we can throw in the vision of low carbon aviation as well, fingers crossed, hopefully, we have a lot of answers to get through by 2050, and a truly exciting outlook. If I had to add one, I'd also add in engineering and green infrastructure, and just what we can actually do with the natural world to support our economy. There's a huge amount of fascinating thinking going on in that space as well at the moment that shouldn't be neglected. Thank you so much to our panel. Fascinating session, and thank you very much.